Hi, my name is Liz Thompson, and this is a video for IME 315 Financial Decision Making for Engineers at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. This video is about decision making in corporations. So when we look at the 5 areas that we'll be covering in this class, this video is about both investment analysis and reporting and managing profits. And we're going to talk a bit about how decision making is made within a corporation. So things like expenditure authority, the capital budgeting process in a corporation, how that particular process works in a large company and actually most any company. And then a little bit about a multi-criteria analysis, which is a way of making decisions that include things beyond money. So when we first look at the hierarchical organization, this is just a typical hierarchical organization where we have at the highest level the board of directors and the president, the CEO. And then below that, they just go down lower and lower. And in this case, the engineers are at the lowest level. Now, what's interesting about this is when we look at approval process and responsibility. So as we at the highest level, it's the highest level of approval. So board of directors can approve most anything, but as we go lower and lower, what usually happens is the dollar limit for approvals gets smaller and smaller. So for instance, engineers might only be able to approve something that's in the range of $1,000 or $10,000, but project managers might be able to approve something that's $100,000. And then you just move up the process until at the highest level, the board of directors makes large investment decisions. Now, what also goes with this is increasing authority. So we know that the board of directors have a higher authority. They have control over a whole organization, while the engineers just have control over their particular tasks they're working on. So this increasing approval level and the increasing authority go together. So there's various methods of evaluation that happen in companies. So if you work for a large corporation, anything sort of that's publicly traded, you'll probably be using very sophisticated methods for evaluating, which include these discounted cash flow methods that we're talking about in engineering economy. Internal rate of return, looking at what level of risk that you're going to be assuming in a particular project, the payback over time, and also the net present value of a particular decision. Now that contrasts with simpler methods that are used by small businesses. So small businesses have a very much of a emphasis on money and cash flow in their checking account. So larger corporations don't have that because they have access to money in a way that smaller businesses don't. They can get loans, they can get, they have their own cash reserves, but smaller companies don't have that. So they often are asking questions that have to do with very short-term decisions, like, do we have enough money to make this decision, and when will I get this money back? So they're not using discounted cash flow processes, they're using things like payback, which we'll talk about later when we talk about the various methods. But just looking at, if you work in a small business, you won't see some of these engineering economy-based evaluation methods. But if you work in a large business, you will. And most small businesses really would like to be large, so they should be thinking through these processes and how to evaluate things as they get bigger and bigger. So let's look a little bit at the capital budgeting process. So this circle in my mind represents a year. So I'm going to start with when usually this capital budgeting process begins. What happens is during the fall, many companies ask their various divisions to submit project proposals. And this will include an evaluation of how well they think the project will return. So things like NPV, which stands for net present value, internal rate of return, IRR, and also non-monetary benefits and costs. And then in around November, later fall, all of the proposals that have been gathered from the divisions are ranked at a corporate level. So they look at what are all of our options for spending money and how will we rank those. And there's various ways of ranking. In the company that I worked for, they had categories like low risk projects versus high risk projects, and then they ranked them by internal rate of return. And that's just the way the process is done, but some sort of ranking process. And then in December, they will maybe evaluate these proposals not only against their performance, but against the strategic direction and the money that is available to spend on capital expenditures. Now, I didn't really mention this before, but if you remember, capital expenditure and capital budgeting is investments, the support revenues over more than a year, so for a long-term process. So what we're talking about is investments that will pay off over time. And then in January, the list of proposed projects that have been both evaluated and ranked and looked at strategic direction are presented to the highest level of the company, to the board of directors, for approval. And there's discussions about that, and they decide yes, no on particular projects. And then around February, the divisions are notified which projects have been approved and that they then can start executing the projects around March or something. So if you look at what happened in September, they submitted their projects, which means that they were actually planning those things way before that in the summer. They didn't get approval for about 9 months in order to get these big projects in space. And then in April to August, we execute projects, develop new projects, and audit old projects. So we often want to look at how did our projections that we thought we were going to be doing, how did that work out? So if we look at an engineer or project manager at the lower levels, these are the things you're involved in. So you execute projects, you develop new projects, and you look at old projects, and you put together proposals for the corporation on the ways you want to spend money. And at the highest level of the company, these are the things that happen. So at the corporate level, they gather all proposals together, they rank them, they look at strategic direction, they make presentations to the board of directors, and then they notify the lower divisions where they can be spending their money. So it's a little bit of understanding the capital budgeting process and how it works within a corporation. Now we're going to switch to a different topic, which is a multi-attribute or multi-criteria analysis. So this is often, in my mind, one of the things that makes engineers who they are, is that they can evaluate various alternatives against each other and make decisions. This is one way of doing that. So in this example, what I have is each row is a criteria and this can be a design criteria, it can be a performance criteria, but whatever the criteria are that you're going to be using to judge a project, you write them on each row. So in this case, we're looking at rate of return, flexibility, sustainability. And then we have across each column is going to be various alternatives. Now, I've just named them A, B, C, D, E, but these can be any kind of alternatives that you will want to be working in. And this kind of analysis is what's done at the highest level too. So when a corporate entity presents this information to the board of directors, they're using this kind of analysis, this kind of what are the criteria we're going to decide on and what are the different things we can do. Now, you can see in this matrix, I've just listed the rate of returns, flexibility, high, medium, low, sustainability, excellent, poor, good, and just sort of put those qualitative things together. Now, we need to have maybe a way of contrasting those together. Then there's a couple different methods for doing that. One is to actually just use color coding. So if you've ever seen Consumer Reports, you know they use this same kind of color coding where red is bad and green is good and yellow is medium. So sometimes when you look at analysis like this, you can see, oh yeah, well actually alternative B probably isn't as good as alternative C, just because of the number of greens and the number of reds, and you can kind of sort of eliminate alternatives that way. Another thing you can do is actually score this. So what I did is I assigned a score where low is 1 and high is 5 to the various alternatives under each of the criteria. So for instance, A, rate of return is pretty high, but not the highest. D is the highest, so I put that at a 5, and then a 4 for A, and then I just sort of kind of made my own judgment calls about how to rank these associated with high to low on the criteria performance. And then I also developed a weighting, like what is the most important thing to consider? So in this case, I just assumed rate of return should be 50% of the consideration, flexibility 30%, and sustainability 20%. So I just went through and did that. And then all I did is calculated a weighted average, and you can see that D has the highest score. So that might indicate that is the alternative we should move ahead with. And that's a method that's used quite a bit in multi-attitude or multi-criteria analysis. So we looked at these three things in this video: expenditure authority issues, the capital budgeting process, how it works, and multi-criteria analysis. And again, this is in the area of investment analysis and reporting and managing profits.